everyone. My name is Ariel Tan, and welcome to today's workshop on leveling up your resume game. Just to share a little bit about myself, so I am the lab manager at the Working Memory and Plasticity Lab here at UCI School of Education. But I did have a background in higher education in training, student leadership development, student supervision, all that good stuff. So that being said, I really do enjoy mentorship, and I really hope that I can provide some of the guidance that other students have been finding helpful in the past. So today, like any kind of presentation I have, I just want to quickly define today's learning outcome to make sure we're on the same page. So the purpose of today's presentation is to, number one, go over like the basic structure of a resume, because it looks like there's a couple different varieties. So I want to clarify some of those different structures, as well as popular myth or controversies about resume structure. And then second is just to understand some of the common issues faced by college students nowadays when writing a resume. And lastly, just have 3 to 4, not very grand, but definitely doable, 3 to 4 tips regarding how to improve your current resume. That being said, I also include a small disclaimer today. So we won't be discussing CVs, cover letters, interviews, or management applications today, just because we can save that for another time. And the information today is meant to be applicable for a wide variety of positions. This means that if you're applying for research positions, hopefully they help. If you're applied in the industry, hopefully they help. But also do know that there are different nuances and preferences in different industries. So the first segment, I want to talk about why do you need a resume? Because I think having purpose and discussing purpose is very important for anything we do in our life. So even before you write your resume, I want you all to kind of think about why do you need a resume? And then generally, people will tell you one of 3 things. They'll either say, okay, you're providing a professional summary, so you can display your qualifications and skills for interview opportunity, which is 100% true. And then some people will also say, oh, it's a way for you to market yourself, which is also true, just like how Da Vinci wrote a letter bragging about himself. He also provides a screening process for employer. This is, once again, also very true, given that most application or most job nowadays ask for a resume or CV of some sort. That being said, what people don't tell you is that resume is basically a way for you to show your expertise and homework before you even meet someone. What I mean is, so if you can demonstrate in your resume that you understand what the industry need, you know what they want, and you can provide them with what you have, that's even bonuses, or that's even better. And then the second is you want to showcase a level of communication skills, which is very important, because can you convey your skills in a professional and efficient manner? And you also want to highlight relevant skills and qualifications. For those of you who have attended the last workshop, you know that more is not always better. And lastly, you also want to connect with your audience. So you want to illustrate that your background actually fit their culture, fit their needs, fit your goals. In bottom line, you also want to grab their attention, given that people don't really spend that much time on resume. So that being said, before you even start writing a resume, what I think is very important is for you to define your professional goals. So think about what type of jobs are you hoping to get, because that goal will in a way set and line out the blueprint for your resume content. You also want to start searching for samples, because this is a part of the homework I keep saying. I always say, like, make sure you're doing your homework. Because what you want to do is you want to kind of look what you kind of want to search for what does the current standard look like for like the industry. And they also kind of want to brainstorm your ideas. So write down your relevant experiences. And this is very important because in my opinion, sometimes what usually happens is a student realizes that, okay, I need a resume. So I'm going to go online, find a resume sample or a template. I'm just going to typing away like what I think makes sense under what line, which is a good way to get things started, because, starting doing something is always better than not doing anything. But what ends up happening is you just start like what I consider word vomiting, just start regurgitating and illustrating a lot of things or not knowing where to start. So if you do your research and search samples, you will know what to write down. And if you brainstorm ideas, you'll kind of make sure that you're writing down the relevant information, so you're not quote unquote word vomiting on the paper. And lastly, consider how you can stand out. So list down all relevant achievements and accomplishments And once you have everything down on a note, and then you can transcribe these brainstorm notes onto the actual template. So now I'm going to talk about what does a strong resume look like. So number one, it has details that highlight the scope of your work. Once again, if you attended my workshop last time, you know that I really emphasize on scope because you want to provide an idea or feeling or vision of how important your work is or was. Has a well thought out and easy to read layout. As mentioned earlier in the little interactive activity we did. Having a clean layout is very important because if your resume is easy to the eye, chances are people will likely to spend more time reading it. Make sure there's no mistakes. Also reflect on critical thinking. When I say reflect on critical thinking is hopefully your resume reflects your critical thinking. So when I read your resume, I can say, oh, so-and-so actually thought ahead about what we need and highlight all these relevant skills. So that's kind of what I consider the theoretical part of the resume writing. One take-home message for you to think about is, given that resume in many, many ways is your first contact, your first impression, your first interaction with a potential job. One thing you should really think about is, does my resume reflect the person I say I am in my description? When I say my description is cover letters, when you share about who you are, because oftentimes I'll get a cover letter that says I'm a detail-oriented person, but the resume doesn't really match that because there's a bunch of mistakes. Sometimes you also have emails saying I'm very experienced in X, Y, and Z. When you look at the resume, it doesn't really reflect that either. So make sure to think, does my resume reflect the person I say I am in the description? All right, so now let's look at what does a weak resume look like, which ideally is the flip side of all the good thing a resume has. Number one is using the one shoe fits all approach, because I mentioned earlier, different industries have different standards. You don't want to submit the wrong resume to the wrong thing. And once again, if you were at my presentation last time, you heard me mentioning I basically have 3 versions of resume, one for each type of job I apply to. Some people will say, okay, write one resume for every single position. That's not realistic and nobody have time for that. So don't do that in my opinion. But definitely if you're applying for research job in a school versus research job in an industry, where you're applying to be a marketing intern versus a social media coordinator, make sure that your resume is tailored towards those different roles. Messy, full of errors, pretty self-explanatory, has lots of irrelevant information, which is pretty self-explanatory, and does not convey your skill meaningfully. The key wording here is meaningfully, which we'll have more example later. The bottom line is you want to make sure the words are written on the paper or on the document is actually conveying truthful, but as well as important and relevant information about what you can do and what you have been doing, aka making you stand out. Okay, and then lastly, another theoretical take-home message: it's okay to not know, because none of us, know anything when we first start school, but it's not okay to not be willing to learn, meaning that it's not okay to not know, but not look out and do the homework beforehand. It's not okay to be okay, well, whatever, these people say, I'm just going to do things my way, because sometimes things don't really work out that way. So now, after the theoretical part, here are the specifics. So generally speaking, there are some rule of thumb. So most font used by resumes are one of the two. Most font, there are 2 types of font. There's serif fonts, which is a font with a little tail. So Times New Roman is one. Georgia is another one. Excuse me, I'm missing the A right there. There's a few other ones. All the default little ones are listed here. There's also something called sans serif, which is the things with no tail. So Arial, Central Gothic, Calibri, etc. These fonts are considered accessible or ADA compliant, which means that when you apply or when you submit or when you publish these resumes, for those who have ADA needs, they're able to access and read or listen to your resumes audially. Sizing wise, usually it's from 10 to 12 points. 9 is too small, 13 is too big. Usually it's black and white. Visually pleasing does not necessarily mean colorful or innovative. Note that there's a little small mark down there. Says there are exceptions though for those of you who are applying for marketing, design type of roles. They definitely want it to be colorful because they want you to showcase your design skill in your resume. Going back to what I said earlier about resumes showing off and highlighting your skills. It has to be straightforward, which means that I have to be able to see exactly what I need in a very, very short amount of time instead of playing like puzzle game. That being said, use bold, italicize, and capitalization to emphasize a heading or a content. So I say this to say sometimes people will be like, oh, let me make something red. That's not necessarily the best way to go about highlighting. You might want to just use bold. Last but not least, make things into 0.5 inch margin. Here's a funny story about myself. So when I was a sophomore, I was really eager to look for internships, so I created this resume. But going back to the word vomit analogy I had, I just basically just keep laying out anything and everything I can think of. And eventually what ended up happening, you just had like 0.12 margin with a bunch of words, which I'm not going to show you a picture. That's like a bad example. So just so you know, here are some general formats. As far as structure goes, so you have to have your name and basic contact information. In this day and age, is not necessarily required for you to put your address because one of the thought processes, okay, if I'm willing to relocate, why does it matter where I live right now? So, which is why oftentimes you use people's name, their phone, as well as their email. That's kind of up to you all. Sometimes people will also include a professional summary or like objective of who they are, what they want to do, which we'll kind of go over an example later. On top of your education and just experiences. The lower half of this slide basically has all the additional things you can include. You can include professional membership, leadership experiences, any volunteer community service, publication, presentation, technical skills, any honors and rewards. These are considered secondary, which means that they are helpful to have, but they're not your core. So in terms of name, basic information, once again, you have full name. You can use your school email address or have a professional email address. This is especially helpful for those of you who might be graduating, meaning because again, sometimes if you're using your EDU address, it may not be forwarded in the right way and you get lost, blah, 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 blah. So it's okay for you to create a professional email address. And when I say professional, I'm not asking you to like buy like a professional Google Suite and have, a .com. What I mean is you can just have arielgtan@gmail.com, something that with your full name in it. Like I have one that just says arieltan.professional@gmail.com. Mailing address, once again, I mentioned earlier, it depends on what you think and where you're applying. It is not necessarily necessary. It is not necessary to include your address. Phone number is default. In this day and age, a lot of us also include LinkedIn or your URL to your portfolio in the heading section. That's totally fine as well. Professional summary. Okay, so professional summary is basically 2 to 3 sentences about your professional experiences and significant accomplishments. When in doubt, you can always check out LinkedIn or people's website for what it can look like. So this is an example. So attended research assistant with 3 years of working experience in NIH-funded cognitive training studies. Experience in administering cognitive batteries, training volunteers, and recruiting participants. The goal of having this summary is so that, in one glance, I can know who you are and what you do. And right now, the big buzzword is research assistant, 3 years, NIH, experienced. Education-wise is any relevant degree or certifications. If you're graduating, you can write anticipated date or graduation date. That also work. Make sure it's reverse chronological order. Include the location. Depends on the field. You don't have to include your GPA. The key is no abbreviation because oftentimes we don't understand what does this abbreviation mean. And then make sure to you can include relevant coursework or specialization. The reason why I put a little star on there is, so if you were in my workshop last time, you heard what I mentioned. I said that I personally don't like putting relevant coursework just because I don't think it's really reflective of my skills, because I can just include those skills in the skill sections and I can explain what I've done as far as the project goes in the actual description. But if you are a freshman or a sophomore, or people with not a lot of experiences in this particular field, it could be helpful for you to include relevant coursework in a way to kind of have more content on your resume when you don't have a lot to showcase. But if you are a graduating person, or you are someone with a lot of experiences, my suggestion is don't include relevant coursework, because you can showcase your skill in another way. Okay, experiences. So here are the things you have to include: location, time period. You can consider using different sections. This means that you can have a section that says relevant or related experience. And then you can also have a section that says research or professional and other experience, etc. This is important and helpful because sometimes people will be like, I've never worked before, I have no professional experience, I don't feel comfortable putting something under professional experiences. Then you can say it's relevant or related. If sometimes people might be like, okay, I do have some experiences, but I want to divide them up based on their functional area, which we'll go on in a second. You can also do that. So functional versus chronological resume. Chronological resume is the most common resume you all see. Basically just lists everything within sections and in the reverse chronological order. Functional resume, on the other hand, is divided by like literally what it says, different functional areas. So for example, you might see someone have like budgeting or finance as one of the section. And you can see someone say social media management, or like marketing, or like front end design, or back end development, something like that. Once again, this is some homework that you all have to do. When I say homework, I mean that you have to look into industry standard to see what industry accept, and then get some feedback, and that's kind of up to your own discretion. Once again, you probably heard this 5 million times from me that by now, use action verb and use quantity to qualify. So don't just use responsible for. Provide feelings or describe the scope of accomplishment. Here are some of my personal favorite words. First, revamp, streamline, system-wide. Use action and project and result formula when creating content. Highlight transferable skills and do not exaggerate or misrepresent your skills. Since all of you were here last time, I would not kind of, over-explain myself. Here's an example. So one of the potential, some of the common things I tend to see on like undergrad's resume is responsible for making reports for administrative team, which is good, but it can be better by looking something like this. Presented a 20-minute report of findings to the senior administrative team, so that when people read it, like, oh, okay, so it's kind of an important presentation, and this is what the presentation looked like, or what the report looked like, and recommendations integrated into city-wide management plan. So now people will be like, oh, okay, so not only it was kind of an important report because it was presented to the senior admin team, there were also recommendations that were later on utilized in the actual management plan. There's another example: identify and address existing gaps between current approach. This one is better than the last one because you started with action verb, and this definitely alludes that you've done something very important. But this one is a little bit better because it says identify existing gaps with the current training approach and knowledge base. So now you're describing a problem. Revamp the employee manual and implement monthly staff training. So now you're describing what you did, like your leadership skills, your problem solving skills, which led to an increase in overall customer satisfaction, because now you are describing your accomplishment. So not only you're a leader in this team, your leadership actually is effective in generating a deliverable. So when in doubt, you can always use your job description requirement and sample as a reference. You can always include transferable skills and related experience. And then when you write your actual content, here are some questions for you to consider in answering with your content. So what was the problem? What was the action that you took to improve or address? What were the results and achievements? and what skills did you use or develop? Here are some other headers, as I mentioned earlier. So you have honors and awards, professional membership and leadership, volunteer and community service. For publication and presentation, as well as technical skills, those, again, vary field by field. If you are going to the private world, they might not really care about your publication and presentation. They will care more about your technical skills, and vice versa if you're going to academia. So in terms of the reverse chronological order I mentioned earlier is basically list your most recent, end with your most ancient, I guess, and select those that are important and relevant to your target population. This is why I say it's good for you to brainstorm first before you even start writing things down, so that when you are actually typing up your resume, you basically have a guideline and blueprint on highlighting those important and relevant information. Your goal is to refine those important relevant information to make them even more powerful, not necessarily spend a lot of time to deleting, rewriting, and regurgitating irrelevant information. So for leadership experience, you can also list out your accomplishment and responsibility, which I'll show you an example later. Once again, do not abbreviate, because some abbreviations are common, like ANOVA. While others are very local, like fiber, for example, for those of you know, is one of our imaging facility for MRI. Other places will call it different things. Okay, so here's an example. This example is from UCSC, hence why you have the UCSC email. But I really like it because I really like the way you look, and I'm sure that I also have a great one too. So number one, you have your name, your address, phone, your contact information, which they cannot give you a font. Your name is the biggest. I forgot to mention earlier, your name should be usually a bigger font so people know that's yours. Right here, they have a summary of qualification. So in here, this person basically explained that they have this background in research analysis, yada, 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 yada. And now in the bottom, this person included these bullet points to outline the technical skills. If it was up to me, I probably won't write it this way, but this is the example they gave you. So the way that the paper described is these bullet points is meant to wow the person. So we can always see that with a grain of salt. Education-wise, so right here, the person introduced education, the GPA. Again, depends on the field. You can include it. You don't have to include it. For those of you who are applying for like research-oriented positions, you can just include your major GPA if you think your overall GPA is not as strong. Anticipated is the graduation time. Here are the relevant experience, and there are the leadership experience. So what this person did is this person probably have multiple different jobs, and then they only focus on the relevant experience now. And later on, it talks about leadership experience because they want to highlight the transferable skills. So this person was the president founder in undergraduate accounting society. So chances are this person wants to get an accountant job. I also have membership and activities included here, which in my opinion, if your experience and technical skill already took out the one page, you don't have to include this additional skill or additional extracurricular, because you have to think about what is your core, what is the core of you as a product you want to kind of showcase to people. If you're describing yourself as a product, all these additional like professional affiliations, professional associations, more like accessories as opposed to core of the product. Do you have any questions so far? Yes, no, maybe? Okay. So now we're going to talk a little bit about application tracking system, which is something I alluded in last presentation as well. So basically, it's an HR software that acts as a database for job applications. So it stores application, but most importantly, analyzes screen keywords. This means that they might filter your application before you even reach the hiring person. So last time when I did the presentation, I mentioned one of the helpful way for you to get past the ATS is to include as much like high frequency word in the resume as possible, or from the job application, from the job description into your resume as possible. And today I want to go over some online resources, and I'm not endorsing or being endorsed by any of them, aka getting paid. I just thought them were really helpful. helpful. So there are two websites called Top Resume, Resume Worded. You can upload your resume. Make sure to remove all your personal information because they will definitely sell your data because this is the society we live in right now. So make sure you'll be removing all of your like actual phone numbers and stuff like that. And you can upload it. And basically what they do is that they have ATS, well, they offer you like a not dumbed down, but like a simplified version of ATS analysis. So as you can see, going to Top Resume, my resume was like 20% finance, 16% human resources, 63% other professional industries. And here are like the keywords that they can all, talk about, mention. And he also gave you a really, really harsh feedback. I take the feedback with a grain of salt because they're trying to sell me something, because the whole thing is like, register with us so we can help you. But this feature is very helpful for you all to get an idea of what your resume look like from a machine learning perspective. The flip side, or not the flip side, on the other side, you have Resume Worded, which offers you the same thing. So give you like a basic analysis. So like the impact, apparently I need, highlight more impact in my resume. There's a brevity. So apparently I have a good start, even though it's still a little long. Skills wise, apparently it's 100%. And overall I have a 73 point as far as what they think my resume is. And they give you some analysis underneath as well. Once again, both are free. You have to take it with a grain of salt. You have to remove your personal information so you can protect your own data, but they can give you a good like machine learning insight or computational linguistic insight on what your resume say about yourself from an ATS perspective. So now here are some general tips I like to give to students when I do one-on-one with them. Number one is don't just copy resumes, always analyze it. And this goes for two layers. One is if you see someone's resume, think about why they're writing it that way. Don't just like copy the word that they're using. Number two, if someone is kind of making modification to your resume, like when they, edit a bunch of things, don't just accept it. Think about, okay, maybe this person's doing this, suggesting or commenting me to take out this way because X, Y, and Z, because this is how you can improve your writing skills. And this is just kind of like over blanket or blanket statement. Don't just accept edits. Always think like an editor and think about why your editor suggests you to do this. Utilize your Career Service Center and Google, not the company, but the website. Again, if you haven't, visit the Career Service Center and get a one-on-one yet, please do so. There's actual like certificate. There's a whole certificate process about being a resume writer. You have to like take tests for it. Those people in the Career Service Center actually have a degree in this kind of thing, and they have resources for you. They have referrals for you. So utilize your resources and also utilize Google because internet is very powerful. Know you will have multiple drafts. That's just kind of nature of things. Get insights from informational interview. So remember how I said earlier about how resume is made for you to kind of showcase that you've done your homework, understand the industry. And this is how you get those insights by doing informational interviews, which you all can then look up the word informational interviews and get simple questions and ask those questions. And then also tailor your resume based on your goals. I think this is very important because oftentimes, like I mentioned earlier, we just start writing. But once you have your goals, then you can kind of sort of move towards a direction more deliberately. PDF is better than PDF is better than Microsoft Documents. And then make sure to save it under your name. Two other things I also previously mentioned. Another thing is you have to think like a hiring manager. And this is something I tend to like tell to candidates or students who have really weak writing skills is if this candidate cannot read job descriptions, communicate their skills through writing or check for errors, can I really trust them that they will read the training information, monitoring organizational emails or writing internal reports. So once again, when you write resumes, also think like a manager. Okay, what information would I want to know if I'm hiring for someone? Lastly, also know when to stop. So sometimes you have to give yourself a threshold, like, okay, today I will work on this is how much I'll work on my resume, and this is how many people I'm gonna ask to like review my resume. And once you reach that threshold, it's okay to move on. I say this to say that sometimes a lot of us are really hesitant on sending out that first resume. You will, have send out a couple resumes and never hear back. You will have a couple of drafts. You will, be asking few different people across a couple months, couple weeks to get feedback, and that's totally okay. It's important for you to have a timeline and understand where is your threshold. It's also okay for you to, and important for you to just say, all right, I'm going to call it a day. It's time to submit. So that's pretty much all the presentation we have today. And now we have some time for Q&A. Right here, I've included all the references I've used, which now in retrospect, I forgot to indicate which one's which. So what you can do, perhaps take a picture and then look up and Google and use those internet power.